I stared at the certified letter in my hand, reading the words for the third time because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. According to the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, my backyard had been officially reclassified as protected wetlands, and therefore my approved plans to build a two-car garage were now permanently denied. The letter was signed by Patricia Henderson, HOA president, in flowing purple ink that somehow made the whole thing feel even more absurd. 6 months ago, I had purchased this beautiful 3-bedroom ranch in Aurora, Colorado, just outside Denver. The house sat on a corner lot with nearly half an acre of land, flat as a pancake and covered in native grasses that turned golden in the summer sun. When I bought the place, one of the main selling points was the ample space to build a detached garage for my vintage car restoration hobby. I had a 1967 Mustang Fastback that needed serious work, and working on it in my driveway was not an option with the strict HOA rules about vehicles being visible from the street. I had done everything by the book. Applied for HOA approval in January, submitted detailed architectural plans that matched the neighborhood aesthetic, paid the $700 review fee, and waited patiently through their 45-day review period. The approval letter had arrived in March, and I had immediately hired Daniels Construction to start work in May. My construction permit from the city was already secured. The concrete foundation was scheduled to be poured next week. Now this. I walked into my kitchen and tossed the letter on the counter, then grabbed my phone to call the HOA office. A cheerful recorded message informed me that office hours were Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3, and that it was currently 5:30 on a Friday evening. Of course it was. They had probably timed the letter delivery specifically, so I would have to stew about it all weekend. My phone rang before I could set it down. The caller ID showed Marcus Chen, my next-door neighbor and the guy who had actually recommended this neighborhood to me when I mentioned I was house hunting last year. "Hey, Marcus," I answered. "Ethan, did you get a letter from the HOA today?" His voice sounded tense. "The wetlands thing." "Yeah, just opened it. What the hell is going on? Can I come over? I think you need to hear some things about Patricia Henderson." 10 minutes later, Marcus was sitting at my kitchen table with a beer, shaking his head as he read through my letter. Marcus was a software engineer in his early 40s, practical and level-headed, which is why his obvious anger caught my attention. "This is complete garbage, Ethan. Your yard is not wetlands. My yard is not wetlands. None of these properties are wetlands. We are on a plateau that is 40 feet above the drainage basin." He set the letter down and looked at me directly. "Patricia is doing this because she does not want you to build that garage. Why would she care? The design was approved. It matches every other garage in the neighborhood. Because your lot is visible from her house, and Patricia Henderson believes she has veto power over anything she can see from her kitchen window." Marcus took a long drink of his beer. "She pulled similar stuff with the Johnsons 3 years ago when they wanted to build a deck. Claimed it violated the tree protection ordinance, even though the arborist report showed the trees were invasive species. They fought her for 8 months and finally gave up because the legal fees were crushing them." I felt my stomach drop. "You are telling me she just makes stuff up and people have to spend thousands fighting her?" "That is exactly what I am telling you. She has been HOA president for 6 years. Nobody runs against her because she has made it clear she will make life miserable for anyone who challenges her authority. She has a whole committee of friends who back up whatever she says." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me the neighborhood Facebook group. "Look at this post from last month." The post was from someone named Sharon requesting approval to paint their front door navy blue, instead of the approved forest green. Patricia had commented with 4 paragraphs about maintaining neighborhood standards and preserving property values, concluding that navy blue was too aggressive for the community aesthetic. Dozens of comments followed, with Patricia's friends piling on about how navy blue would be the beginning of the end for Meadowbrook Hills. She is serious about a paint color. I could not believe what I was reading. Oh, she is serious about everything. The woman has nothing else in her life except controlling this HOA. Marcus finished his beer. Her kids are grown and out of state. Her husband divorced her 4 years ago. Being HOA president is her entire identity, and she loves the power. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. So what do? I already have a construction crew hired. My permit is valid. The approval was in writing. You fight her, but you need to be smart about it. Marcus stood up to leave. Document everything. Get copies of every communication, and whatever you do, do not lose your temper with her. She loves it when people get emotional, because then she can play the victim. After Marcus left, I spent the weekend researching wetlands regulations in Colorado. What I learned was actually encouraging. True wetlands designation required specific criteria: hydric soils, water-loving plants, and evidence of water saturation during the growing season. My yard had none of these features. It was covered in buffalo grass and blue grama, both drought-tolerant prairie species. The soil was sandy loam that drained quickly after rain. I had never seen standing water, not even during the spring snowmelt. Monday morning, I took a half-day off work and drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small professional building near the neighborhood entrance. The office was sparse, with generic landscape paintings on the walls and a desk where a young woman named Kelly worked as the part-time administrator. I need to speak with Patricia Henderson about this wetlands designation, I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. Kelly's expression became sympathetic. She is not in the office today, but I can leave her a message. When will she be in? She usually comes by on Wednesday afternoons. Kelly glanced at her computer screen. I see your file here. The notice went out Friday as an emergency revision to your building permit approval. Emergency revision based on what? Who did the wetlands assessment? Kelly shifted uncomfortably. I just processed the paperwork, sir. You would need to discuss the details with Mrs. Henderson. I left my contact information and drove to the Aurora Municipal Building to check on my construction permit. The city planning office confirmed that my permit was still valid and that the city had no wetlands designation for my property. The planner I spoke with, a helpful woman named Jennifer, even pulled up the county soil maps on her computer. See, you are on Colby Loam, which is well-drained upland soil, Jennifer explained, pointing to the color-coded map. If this was wetlands, it would show up on the National Wetlands Inventory. Want me to check that too? She pulled up the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wetlands Mapper. My property showed no wetlands designation. The nearest mapped wetland was a seasonal pond nearly 3/4 of a mile away. Can you print this for me? I asked. Sure. And if you need an official letter stating the city's position, I can have my supervisor draft one. It sounds like you might have an HOA situation. Her knowing smile told me she had seen this before. Armed with printed maps and a promise of an official city letter, I felt more confident. Patricia Henderson might be used to pushing people around, but I had facts on my side. I just needed to present them properly and force the HOA to back down. Wednesday afternoon, I returned to the HOA office at exactly 2:30. Patricia Henderson was there, and she looked exactly like I had imagined. She was probably in her late 50s, with aggressively blonde hair styled in a stiff bob. wearing a cream-colored blazer and enough jewelry to suggest she took her HOA role very seriously. Her expression when Kelly told her I was there to see her was a mix of annoyance and satisfaction, like she had been expecting me and was pleased to have another person to lecture. "Mr. Rivers," she said, not offering to shake hands, "I assume you are here about the wetlands revision." "I am here to understand how my property suddenly became wetlands when it was approved for construction just 2 months ago," I said evenly. Patricia settled into her chair behind the desk, folding her hands in front of her. "The HOA board received new information that indicated your property contains environmentally sensitive areas. We have an obligation to protect the community's natural resources." "What new information? Who conducted the assessment?" "That is internal board information. We are not required to disclose our sources." Her tone was condescending, like she was explaining something to a child. I pulled out my printed documents. "I have soil maps from the county showing my property is upland loam. I have the National Wetlands Inventory showing no wetlands designation. I have a letter from the City Planning Department confirming my permit is valid. So where exactly is this wetlands data coming from?" Patricia barely glanced at my papers. "The HOA has its own environmental consultant who reviewed recent aerial imagery and drainage patterns. The consultant determined that your property falls within a potential wetlands buffer zone." Potential buffer zone. That is not a real designation. Either it is wetlands or it is not. I kept my voice level, remembering Marcus's advice about staying calm. "Mr. Rivers, I understand you are disappointed, but the HOA has the authority to revise approvals when new environmental concerns arise. This is stated clearly in the covenants you agreed to when you purchased your property." Patricia stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "If you wish to dispute this decision, you may file a formal appeal with the board. The process is outlined in Section 12 of the HOA bylaws. The filing fee is $500. So I have to pay $500 to appeal a decision based on secret evidence from an unnamed consultant." The absurdity was stunning. "Those are the rules, Mr. Rivers. I did not write them, but I am obligated to enforce them." Patricia moved toward the door. "Kelly can provide you with the appeal forms." I left the office with a stack of forms and a growing certainty that Marcus was right. This was not about wetlands. This was about Patricia asserting control. The question was how to beat her at her own game without bankrupting myself in the process. That evening, I called my real estate attorney, David Mitchell, who had handled my house closing. I explained the situation and emailed him all my documentation. "This is interesting," David said after reviewing everything. "The HOA can enforce reasonable restrictions, but they cannot make false claims about environmental conditions that are objectively verifiable. If you can prove there are no wetlands, you might have grounds for a lawsuit claiming arbitrary and capricious decision-making. How much would that cost? Could easily run $10,000 to $15,000, maybe more if it drags out. And even if you win, collecting attorney fees from an HOA can be challenging." He paused. "Let me suggest a different approach first. Get an independent soil report from a certified professional. Make it detailed and technical, something they cannot easily dismiss. Then file your appeal and present it at a board meeting. Put them on record. If they still deny you despite clear scientific evidence, then you have a stronger case for legal action, and the judge will not look kindly on their behavior." It made sense. I needed to build an airtight case that would either force the HOA to back down or expose them in court. The next morning, I started calling environmental consultants. The third one I tried, a firm called Rocky Mountain Soil and Water Analysis, understood exactly what I needed. "You want a comprehensive wetlands delineation study," said the consultant, a man named Robert Pearson. "We will assess the soils, vegetation, and hydrology. If it is not wetlands, the report will clearly state that." These reports hold up in court because they follow the Army Corps of Engineers methodology. How long does it take? I can have someone out there tomorrow. The field work takes about 4 hours. Report will be ready in a week. Cost is $2,800. I swallowed hard at the price, but agreed. This was my home and my property rights. If I had to spend $3,000 to prove Patricia Henderson was abusing her authority, it would be worth it. Robert himself showed up the next day with a younger associate named Michelle. They spent the morning digging soil pits in various locations around my yard, documenting the soil layers, taking photographs, and surveying the vegetation. I watched from my deck as they worked methodically, comparing what they found to thick field guides and making detailed notes. "Well, I can tell you preliminarily that this is definitely not wetlands," Robert said when they finished. "Soil structure is all wrong. No hydric indicators. Vegetation is all upland species. And the topography shows positive drainage away from your foundation. But I will document everything properly in the report." While waiting for the report, I filed my appeal with the HOA and paid the $500 fee. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which would give me time to have the soil report in hand. In the meantime, I had to tell my contractor to postpone the garage construction, which cost me a rescheduling fee and meant the project would not be completed before winter. Marcus kept me updated on neighborhood gossip. Apparently, Patricia was telling people that I was trying to destroy sensitive habitat and that she was protecting the community from environmental damage. Several neighbors who did not know me personally had started giving me cold looks when I drove past. Patricia was shaping the narrative in her favor. "You need to get ahead of this," Marcus advised. "Post your side of the story on the neighborhood Facebook group. Show people the evidence." I drafted a careful post explaining that I had obtained professional soil analysis and that I was simply trying to build an approved structure on my property. I attached the county's soil maps and the National Wetlands Inventory screenshot. The response was mixed. Some neighbors were supportive, saying Patricia had gone too far. But Patricia's allies immediately attacked, with comments about how I was being selfish and putting my own desires ahead of community welfare. One comment from a woman named Deborah struck me as particularly manipulative. "We all make sacrifices to live in a nice community. If the HOA says it is wetlands, there must be a good reason. Why does he think he knows better than the experts?" I wanted to reply that I had actual experts with actual credentials, but I remembered David's advice about not getting into online arguments. Everything I said could potentially be used against me later. The soil report arrived 6 days after the field work. It was 43 pages of detailed analysis with photographs, soil classification data, vegetation surveys, and hydrology assessments. The conclusion was unambiguous. The subject property does not meet any of the criteria for wetlands designation under the Army Corps of Engineers methodology. Soils are well-drained Colby loam with no hydric indicators. Vegetation is dominated by upland prairie species. No evidence of water saturation was observed. This property is upland habitat and does not fall under wetlands protection regulations. I had never been so happy to read a technical document in my life. I made 10 copies and sent one to David Mitchell immediately. "This is excellent," David said when he called me back. "This is exactly the kind of evidence that courts respect. Bring this to your appeal hearing and see what the board does. If they still deny you, we will have a very strong case. The appeal hearing was held on a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. The HOA board consisted of 5 members. Patricia as president, a man named Greg Sawyer as vice president, a woman named Linda Marsh as treasurer, and 2 at-large members named Tom Bradford and Susan Winters. I arrived 15 minutes early with 3 copies of my soil report, my appeal file, and a notebook where I had outlined my key points. The clubhouse was more crowded than I expected. At least 30 neighbors had shown up, and I realized Patricia must have encouraged people to attend. Most of them were probably here to support her. Marcus was there too, sitting in the back and giving me a subtle thumbs up. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. There were several routine items on the agenda first, including a discussion about pool rules and a vote on landscaping contracts. I waited anxiously as they worked through the mundane business. Finally, at 7:45, Patricia announced my appeal. Next, we have the appeal filed by Ethan Rivers regarding the wetlands designation on his property at 4267 Meadowbrook Circle. Mr. Rivers, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood and distributed copies of the soil report to each board member. Thank you for hearing my appeal. I have obtained a professional wetlands delineation study from Rocky Mountain Soil and Water Analysis, a certified environmental consulting firm. Their report conclusively shows that my property does not meet any of the federal criteria for wetlands designation. I walked them through the key findings: the soil types, the vegetation analysis, the lack of hydrology indicators. Several board members were actually reading the report carefully. Linda Marsh, the treasurer, looked particularly interested in the photographs showing the soil profile. The city of Aurora has confirmed that my property has no wetlands designation and that my construction permit remains valid, I continued. The county soil maps, which are based on comprehensive surveys, classify my property as well-drained upland. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Wetlands Inventory shows no wetlands on my lot. I have followed every rule, obtained all necessary approvals, and hired qualified professionals to verify the facts. I am respectfully asking the board to rescind the wetlands designation and allow me to proceed with my approved garage construction. Patricia barely looked at the report. Mr. Rivers, did your consultant assess the entire drainage basin and the cumulative impacts of development in this area? The report addresses the specific conditions on my property, which is the relevant question. My lot is not connected to any wetland system. I disagree. Environmental protection requires us to think holistically about ecosystems, not just individual parcels. Patricia looked at her fellow board members. The board's environmental consultant considered the broader context. Who is the board's consultant? What are their qualifications? I asked directly. That is confidential board information. Linda Marsh spoke up. Patricia, I think we should know who provided the environmental assessment. This is a significant issue. Patricia's expression tightened. The consultant wishes to remain anonymous to avoid being harassed by property owners. That does not sound like a credible consultant, Tom Bradford said. He was an older man, probably in his 70s, with a no-nonsense demeanor. I have been on this board for 4 years, and this is the first I am hearing about any environmental consultant. The room suddenly felt electric. Patricia was being challenged by her own board members. I received information from a concerned community member with environmental expertise, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. I brought this to the executive committee for emergency review. The executive committee is just you and Greg, Susan Winters pointed out. When did the full board vote on this wetlands designation? We did not need a full board vote for an emergency environmental protection measure. Linda Marsh flipped through the HOA bylaws. Actually, Patricia, Section 8 says any reversal of an approved application requires a majority vote of the full board. You cannot do this unilaterally, even in an emergency. I watched Patricia's face turn red. She had not expected her own board to turn on her. Greg Sawyer, the vice president, had been silent the entire time, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We can vote right now," Patricia said sharply. "All in favor of upholding the wetlands designation, say aye." "Aye," Greg said quietly, silence from the other 3 board members. All opposed. Linda, Tom, and Susan all said nay. "The wetlands designation is overturned," Tom Bradford said. "Mr. Rivers, you can proceed with your construction." The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia looked stunned, then furious. "This is a mistake. We are opening ourselves up to environmental liability." "No, we are following our own rules and respecting property rights," Linda said firmly. "If there was a genuine environmental concern, it would show up in professional assessments. This gentleman spent thousands of dollars proving there is no wetlands on his lot. We need to accept that." I gathered my documents, thanking the board members who had voted in my favor. As I walked out of the clubhouse, several neighbors I did not know stopped me to apologize for believing Patricia's version of events. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was incredible," he said, grinning. "I have never seen anyone stand up to Patricia like that." And her own board turned on her. "I just showed them the facts," I said, but I was elated. "Think she will retaliate somehow?" "Probably, but now the rest of the board is watching her. You might have actually changed the power dynamic in this HOA." Over the next few days, the neighborhood Facebook group was full of discussions about the meeting. Some of Patricia's supporters claimed the board had acted irresponsibly, but more people were questioning how the wetlands designation had happened in the first place. A neighbor named Rachel posted that Patricia had tried to block her fence installation 2 years ago with similar tactics, claiming it violated some obscure ordinance that turned out to be from a completely different HOA. Then, 10 days after the hearing, I received another certified letter. This time it was from the HOA attorney, a firm called Morrison and Associates. The letter stated that upon further review, the board had identified procedural irregularities in my original approval, and that my garage application needed to be re-reviewed under updated architectural guidelines. The new review would take 60 days and require an additional $1,000 review fee. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Patricia was not giving up. She was just finding new ways to block me. I forwarded the letter to David Mitchell immediately. He called me within an hour. "This is harassment, Ethan. They already approved you. You appealed their reversal and won. Now they are inventing new reasons to block you." David sounded genuinely angry. "I think it is time to file suit. This has crossed the line from aggressive HOA enforcement to malicious interference with your property rights. What would we be suing for? Breach of contract, for starters. They approved your application and you relied on that approval. You hired contractors, obtained permits, and spent money on the soil report. We can also claim intentional interference with contractual relations and possibly harassment. And we will ask for attorney fees, which means if we win, they pay your legal costs. How strong is the case? Very strong. You have documentation of everything. You can prove the wetlands designation was baseless. You won your appeal. Now they are inventing new obstacles. A judge will not like this pattern of behavior." David paused. "There is something else you should know. If we sue, We will likely discover who gave Patricia the false wetlands information. That will come out in discovery. If someone knowingly provided false environmental information to block your project, that could be fraud. The idea of dragging this into court was exhausting, but I was not going to let Patricia Henderson bully me into giving up on my garage. Let us do it. File the lawsuit. David prepared the complaint over the next week. The lawsuit named the HOA as the defendant and Patricia Henderson individually as a co-defendant, arguing that she had acted outside her authority and in bad faith. We sued for $25,000 in damages plus attorney fees and injunctive relief, ordering the HOA to allow my construction. When the HOA was served with the lawsuit, the reaction was immediate. Patricia sent out an email to all homeowners claiming that I was attacking the community and trying to bankrupt the HOA with frivolous litigation. She set up a special assessment of $200 per household to fund the legal defense. That email was a mistake. Homeowners were suddenly very interested in why they had to pay $200 because Patricia had blocked someone's garage. The Facebook group exploded with angry comments. Even some of Patricia's allies were questioning why the HOA was spending money to defend what increasingly looked like Patricia's personal vendetta. Linda Marsh resigned from the board in protest, posting a public letter explaining that she could not support the HOA's legal position and that Patricia had repeatedly violated proper procedures. Her letter included details about several other instances where Patricia had made unilateral decisions without board approval. The lawsuit triggered discovery, which meant both sides had to turn over relevant documents. David subpoenaed all HOA records related to my application, including emails and communications with any environmental consultants. What we found was damning. There was no environmental consultant. Patricia had received a single email from a neighbor named Deborah Sullivan, the same woman who had defended Patricia on Facebook. Deborah's email said she had read online that properties near drainage areas could be wetlands and suggested that Patricia should investigate before allowing construction. Deborah had no environmental expertise whatsoever. She was a retired bank manager. Based on this one email from an unqualified source, Patricia had unilaterally declared my property to be wetlands and revoked my approval. She had never consulted an actual environmental professional. She had never looked at soil maps or wetlands inventories. She had simply used environmental protection as a pretext to block my garage because, as Marcus had predicted, she did not like the view from her kitchen window. The emails also revealed something more troubling. Patricia had written to Greg Sawyer saying, "We need to stop this garage project. I am tired of looking at that ugly corner lot. If we say it is wetlands, he will give up like the Johnsons did with their deck." David was thrilled when he saw these emails. "This is gold, Ethan. This shows intentional misuse of authority for personal reasons. No judge is going to side with them now." The HOA's attorney clearly reached the same conclusion, because 2 weeks later, Morrison and Associates filed a motion to dismiss Patricia as a defendant, claiming she was just following board procedures. But David opposed the motion, arguing that Patricia had acted individually and outside her authority. The judge agreed, ruling that Patricia would remain a defendant and that the case would proceed to trial. Facing a trial where her emails would be read in open court, Patricia finally cracked. Her attorney requested a settlement conference, which was held in mid-September in a conference room at the courthouse. Patricia attended with her attorney, looking significantly less confident than she had at the HOA meeting. The HOA was represented by a different board member, Tom Bradford, who had taken over as interim president after Patricia was placed on administrative leave by the remaining board. The mediation session lasted 3 hours. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that she had made an honest mistake based on incomplete information. But David systematically destroyed that argument by pointing to the emails showing premeditation and personal motivation. Tom Bradford, to his credit, acknowledged that the HOA had acted improperly and wanted to resolve the matter. The final settlement was better than I had hoped for. The HOA would immediately approve my garage construction with no further fees or delays. They would reimburse me for the soil report, the appeal fee, and my contractor's rescheduling costs, totaling $4,500. They would pay my attorney fees, which had reached $18,000 by that point. And Patricia Henderson would resign as HOA president, and from the board entirely, agreeing not to serve in any HOA leadership role for 5 years. Patricia signed the settlement agreement without saying a word, her expression bitter. Tom Bradford shook my hand and apologized on behalf of the community. "We failed in our oversight," Tom said. "Patricia had too much power for too long, and nobody challenged her until you did. This has been a wake-up call for a lot of us." The settlement was finalized in early October. By mid-October, the foundation for my garage was poured. By Thanksgiving, the walls were up and the roof was on. My contractor, who had heard the whole story by this point, did excellent work and even gave me a discount for the trouble I had been through. The garage was completed in early December, just before the first major snowstorm. It was perfect. 2 bays with plenty of room for my Mustang and workspace for restoration. I bought a space heater and spent the first evening in my new garage just sitting there, admiring what I had fought so hard to achieve. The following week, I ran into Marcus at the neighborhood mailboxes. He was grinning. "Did you hear the latest?" Marcus asked. "The new board is revising the HOA covenants. They are adding provisions requiring environmental claims to be backed up by licensed professionals, and they are limiting the president's authority to act without full board votes. They are calling it the Rivers Reform." I laughed. "I just wanted to build a garage. You did more than that. You broke Patricia Henderson's grip on this community. People are actually considering running for the board now. There is going to be a real election next year." Marcus looked at my house, where warm light glowed from the windows. "You know, I think this neighborhood might actually become a pleasant place to live now." Over the next few months, life in Meadowbrook Hills changed noticeably. The new board under Tom Bradford's leadership was more transparent and reasonable. They held open meetings and encouraged homeowner input. When disputes arose, they actually investigated the facts instead of relying on Patricia's autocratic pronouncements. Several of Patricia's most ardent supporters quietly apologized to me, admitting they had been caught up in her narrative without questioning it. Patricia herself moved out of the neighborhood in February, selling her house to a young couple with 2 kids. I saw her once during the moving process, loading boxes into a U-Haul. Our eyes met briefly across the street, and I could see the resentment still burning there. But I felt no anger toward her anymore, just pity. She had built her entire identity around controlling a small HOA in a suburban neighborhood, and when that control was challenged with facts and proper procedures, it had all collapsed. The young couple who bought Patricia's house introduced themselves to me in March. Their names were Andrew and Amy Zimmerman, and they had a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. "We heard you were the guy who stood up to the old HOA president," Andrew said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. The real estate agent actually mentioned it as a selling point, said the neighborhood was under new management and much more reasonable now. That made me laugh. I just wanted to build a garage, but I am glad it worked out for everyone. By April, my Mustang restoration was in full swing. I spent evenings and weekends in the garage, stripping paint, rebuilding the engine, and fabricating parts. Neighbors would sometimes stop by to check out the progress, and the garage became a bit of a community gathering spot. Marcus started bringing his teenage son over to learn about engines. Tom Bradford, who turned out to be a retired mechanical engineer, gave me advice on suspension geometry. The neighborhood Facebook group, once a battleground of accusations and HOA drama, transformed into an actual community forum. People shared recommendations for contractors, organized block parties, and discussed genuine neighborhood concerns without the toxic atmosphere that Patricia had cultivated. When disagreements arose, they were resolved through conversation rather than autocratic decree. In June, the annual HOA election took place. 5 positions were contested and 12 people ran for the board. It was the first competitive election in over a decade. The new board included Linda Marsh, who agreed to return as treasurer, along with 4 other homeowners who campaigned on platforms of transparency and common-sense governance. Tom Bradford decided to retire from the board, saying he had served his time, and the community needed fresh perspectives. At the annual meeting where the new board was introduced, Linda Marsh gave a speech that acknowledged the problems of the past year. "We lost our way as a community," she said. "We allowed one person's need for control to override common sense and fairness. Thanks to one homeowner's courage to challenge bad decisions and demand accountability, we have a chance to do better. The HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. That is the standard we will uphold going forward." The room applauded, and I felt a genuine sense of satisfaction. Not because I had won or because Patricia had lost, but because a community had learned something important about governance and accountability. My Mustang restoration was completed in September, exactly 2 years after I had first moved into the neighborhood. The car gleamed in the autumn sunlight, its original lime gold paint perfectly replicated, the 390 cubic inch V8 engine purring with smooth power. I took it to a local car show and won second place in the classic muscle car category, which felt like a fitting conclusion to the whole saga. Marcus and I sat on my deck that evening, drinking beers and admiring the Mustang parked in front of the garage. "You know, you probably could have just given up and parked the car somewhere else," Marcus said. "Would have saved yourself a lot of stress and money." "Probably," I agreed. But then, Patricia would still be running this HOA into the ground, and everyone would still be afraid to challenge her. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even when it is expensive and exhausting. That is very philosophical for a guy who just wanted to work on his car. I laughed. I contain multitudes. The next day, I received an unexpected email from Robert Pearson, the soil consultant who had prepared the Wetlands report. He wrote that he had heard about the lawsuit outcome and wanted to thank me. Apparently, Patricia Henderson had been spreading false wetlands claims about several properties in the area, trying to block various projects. My case had exposed her tactics, and 2 other homeowners who had previously given up on projects were now moving forward with new applications, armed with proper soil reports. "Your willingness to fight this did not just help you," Robert wrote. "It protected the integrity of environmental science and stopped someone from weaponizing environmental protection for personal grievances. That matters more than you might realize." I had not thought about the broader implications, but Robert was right. Environmental protections are important, but they have to be based on actual science, not on the whims of someone who wants to control their neighbors. By demanding proof and standing up to false claims, I had actually strengthened legitimate environmental protections rather than weakening them. In October, I got a call from a local newspaper reporter who was writing a story about HOA reform efforts in suburban Colorado communities. She had heard about the Meadowbrook Hills situation and wanted to interview me. I was hesitant at first, but Marcus convinced me that sharing the story might help other homeowners dealing with similar problems. The article ran in November, titled, "When HOAs Go Too Far: One Homeowner's Fight Against Fake Wetlands and Real Bullying." It presented the facts fairly and included interviews with several other homeowners who had experienced Patricia's tactics. The article also interviewed HOA governance experts who said the situation was more common than people realized, with about 15% of HOAs having serious problems with board overreach. The article generated significant local interest. I received emails from homeowners in other subdivisions asking for advice on dealing with their own HOA problems. Some were facing situations remarkably similar to mine: arbitrary rule enforcement, personal vendettas disguised as policy, and boards that operated without accountability. I shared my experience and emphasized the importance of documentation, professional evidence, and willingness to pursue legal action when necessary. One email particularly stuck with me. It was from a woman named Helen who lived in a community about 20 miles from mine. Her HOA president had declared her vegetable garden to be a code violation and ordered her to remove it, claiming edible plants were prohibited under landscaping standards. Helen had checked the actual covenants and found no such restriction. After reading my story, she filed a formal challenge and hired an attorney. 2 weeks later, the HOA backed down, and Helen's garden was allowed to stay. "Thank you for showing that it is possible to win," Helen wrote. "I was ready to just give up and plant flowers instead. Your story reminded me that my property rights matter." By the time winter arrived, life had settled into a comfortable routine. I worked on smaller projects in my garage, maintaining the Mustang and helping neighbors with minor repairs. The community continued to function under its reformed board structure, with occasional disagreements, but nothing approaching the dysfunction of the Patricia Henderson era. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood organized a block party in the clubhouse. It was the first time I had been back in that building since the appeal hearing over a year earlier. The atmosphere was completely different. People were laughing, kids were running around playing games, and there was a genuine sense of community rather than the tense compliance that had characterized Patricia's reign. Tom Bradford cornered me near the snack table and handed me a beer. "I wanted to thank you again, Ethan," he said. "I had been on that board for 4 years and I was too complacent. I let Patricia do whatever she wanted because it was easier than fighting her. You showed up and did what I should have been doing all along. You held the board accountable. You voted against her when it mattered," I pointed out. "You and Linda and Susan. That took courage too. Only after you did the hard work of proving she was wrong. You spent thousands of dollars and months of your time fighting for something you should have gotten without a fight. That is not right, and I am sorry it happened." We clinked bottles and watched the party unfold around us. The Zimmerman kids were playing with other neighborhood children, their laughter echoing through the clubhouse. Young couples danced to music playing from someone's phone. Older neighbors sat in clusters, sharing stories and making plans for spring garden projects. This was what an HOA was supposed to enable. A genuine community where people chose to live together under mutually agreed rules that served everyone's interests. Not a fiefdom where one person's ego dictated what everyone else could do with their property. As midnight approached, Linda Marsh called everyone together for a countdown. When we reached 0 and cheered for the new year, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The fight with Patricia Henderson had been exhausting and expensive, but it had also revealed something important. When people stand up for their rights with facts and determination, they can change broken systems. It was not easy and it was not quick, but it was possible. The following spring, I started a small consulting side business helping homeowners deal with HOA disputes. I was not a lawyer and made that clear, but I could help people understand their rights, document their cases, and find the right professionals to support their claims. The work was part-time and mostly involved giving advice over email or phone, but it felt meaningful. I had learned expensive lessons during my battle with Patricia Henderson, and if I could help others avoid some of that cost and stress, it seemed worthwhile. Marcus joked that I had become the neighborhood HOA expert, which was ironic since I had only wanted to build a garage and work on my car. But life had pushed me into this role, and I accepted it. In March, I got a call from David Mitchell, my attorney. He had stayed in touch even after the case was settled, and we had developed a friendly relationship. "I thought you would want to know," David said. "Patricia Henderson bought a house in a neighborhood with no HOA. A friend of mine handled the closing." I had to laugh at the irony. After spending years controlling every aspect of Meadowbrook Hills, Patricia had chosen to live somewhere with no community governance at all. Maybe she had learned something from the experience, or maybe she just could not stand being subject to rules enforced by anyone else. "I hope she is happier there," I said, and I meant it. Carrying around that much need for control could not have been satisfying, even when she was getting her way. "You are more generous than I would be," David said. "She cost you a lot of money and stress." And I learned a lot and made some good friends because of it. Things worked out. By summer, my Mustang had become a regular sight at local car shows and cruise nights. I joined a classic car club and met people who shared my enthusiasm for restoration. Some of them had their own stories about HOA battles over project cars and garages, and we would compare notes and share strategies. The car culture community turned out to be surprisingly knowledgeable about property rights law, probably because so many gearheads had faced similar obstacles. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA continued to evolve in positive directions. The board implemented an online portal where homeowners could track their applications and see the status of community projects. They published detailed minutes from every board meeting. They created an ombudsman position to help resolve disputes before they escalated to formal hearings. Slowly but steadily, trust was being rebuilt between the board and the community. In August, I received an invitation to speak at a statewide HOA reform conference in Denver. The organizers had read the newspaper article and thought my story would resonate with other homeowners and board members. I was nervous about public speaking, but Marcus convinced me to accept. The conference was held at a downtown hotel and attended by about 200 people, homeowners, board members, property managers, and attorneys. I gave a 30-minute presentation about my experience, focusing on the importance of documentation, professional evidence, and understanding your rights under both HOA covenants and state law. The response was overwhelming. During the question and answer session, person after person stood up to share similar stories. HOA boards blocking solar panels with false engineering claims, preventing home businesses through selective enforcement, denying accommodations for disabilities, and retaliating against homeowners who asked questions. The room was full of people who had been bullied by their HOAs and did not know how to fight back. After the presentation, at least 20 people came up to thank me and ask for additional advice. One man, near tears, explained that his HOA had foreclosed on his house over a disputed $70 fine. A woman described how her HOA had banned her from using her backyard for her daughter's birthday party, claiming it was a commercial event because she had posted pictures on social media. The stories were both heartbreaking and infuriating. I left the conference with a deeper understanding of how widespread HOA abuse really was. My situation with Patricia Henderson was not unusual. Across the country, homeowners associations were being used as vehicles for petty tyranny, personal vendettas, and power trips. Most people either gave in or moved away rather than fighting back, which only emboldened the bullies. That evening, Marcus and I sat in my garage with the doors open, watching the sunset and talking about the conference. "You know, you could really make a difference with this," Marcus said. "Not just helping individual homeowners, but pushing for legal reforms. Colorado could use better HOA accountability laws." "I am not a politician or an activist," I protested. "I am just a guy who builds databases for a living and works on old cars. You were also just a guy who wanted to build a garage, and you ended up reforming an entire HOA. Sometimes ordinary people end up doing extraordinary things because circumstances demand it." I thought about that. Marcus was right that the existing legal framework was inadequate. HOAs could get away with almost anything unless homeowners were willing and able to spend thousands on legal fees. That barrier protected bad actors and left most people without effective recourse. Over the next few months, I started connecting with HOA reform advocates across Colorado. There was a loosely organized coalition of homeowners, attorneys, and legislators who were working on various bills to increase HOA transparency and accountability. They invited me to testify at legislative committee hearings based on my personal experience. In February of the following year, I found myself in the Colorado State Capitol building, sitting at a witness table in front of the House Local Government Committee. I was there to support a bill that would require HOAs to provide detailed written justifications for denying applications, including citations to specific covenant provisions and any professional reports relied upon. The bill would also mandate that HOAs provide free copies of all governing documents to homeowners on request. My testimony lasted about 8 minutes. I described how Patricia Henderson had blocked my garage with false wetlands claims, how I had to spend thousands proving her wrong, and how the lack of transparency had enabled her abuse. I explained that simple reforms requiring documentation and justification would prevent most of these problems while still allowing HOAs to fulfill their legitimate functions. Several committee members asked questions, and the tone was generally sympathetic. One representative, a woman named Jennifer Park from Littleton, had personally dealt with HOA problems in her district and was a strong supporter of reform. "What you experience should not be legal," Representative Park said. "When an HOA can make false environmental claims without consequences, that is not governance. That is harassment with a legal shield." The bill passed the committee and eventually passed both chambers of the legislature, though in a somewhat watered-down form after HOA industry lobbyists negotiated changes. Still, it was progress. Starting the following year, Colorado HOAs would have to provide better documentation and justification for their decisions, which would make it harder for future Patricia Hendersons to abuse their authority. By the time spring arrived again, I had been living in Meadowbrook Hills for over 3 years. My garage was well established, my Mustang was winning awards, and the neighborhood felt like a genuine community rather than a collection of houses governed by fear. The reforms I had pushed for, both locally and at the state level, were making a real difference. One Saturday afternoon in April, I was in my garage working on a carburetor when Andrew Zimmerman walked over with his daughter, Emma, who was now 6 years old. "Emma wants to see the pretty yellow car," Andrew explained. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the driver's side door. "Want to sit in it?" Emma's eyes went wide and she nodded enthusiastically. I lifted her into the driver's seat, and she gripped the steering wheel with both hands, making engine noises. "This is the coolest car ever," Emma declared. "When I grow up, I want a car like this." "Work hard, save your money, and you can have whatever you want," I told her. "Just make sure you have a garage to keep it in," Andrew laughed. "We heard the whole story from the neighbors about what you went through to build this garage. I cannot believe the old HOA president tried to block it." "She did more than try, but it worked out in the end." I helped Emma out of the car and she ran off to play in the driveway. The important thing is that nobody should have to go through what I did just to use their own property. That is why the rules got changed. Well, we appreciate it. We are planning to build a deck next summer, and it is nice to know the HOA will be reasonable about it. After Andrew and Emma left, I stood in my garage and looked at the Mustang, at the tools organized on the walls, at the space I had fought so hard to create. This building represented more than just a place to work on cars. It represented the principle that property rights matter, that facts trump feelings, and that ordinary people can challenge institutional power when they are in the right. The story of my battle with Patricia Henderson and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA had become somewhat legendary in local circles. People still brought it up at car shows, at neighborhood gatherings, and at HOA reform meetings. Some saw it as an inspiring story of perseverance. Others saw it as a cautionary tale about what happens when boards operate without accountability. For me, it was simply what I had to do. I had bought a house with a plan to build a garage. When someone tried to stop me with false claims and abuse of authority, I stood my ground. I documented everything. I gathered professional evidence. I followed the proper procedures, and I was willing to go to court if necessary. In the end, facts and determination won out over bullying and manipulation. The lesson, I realized, was not complicated. Know your rights, document everything, demand accountability, and do not give up when you are right. Those principles applied far beyond HOA disputes. They were fundamental to maintaining any kind of fair and functional society. As the sun set over the Colorado plains and cast orange light across my garage, I felt profoundly grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. The fight with Patricia Henderson had been stressful and expensive, but it had also connected me to my community, taught me about civic engagement, and shown me that ordinary people really could make a difference when they were willing to stand up for what was right. I closed the garage doors, walked back to my house, and looked at the Meadowbrook Hills neighborhood spreading out around me. Lights were coming on in houses as families settled in for the evening. Kids were playing basketball in driveways. Neighbors were walking dogs and chatting at mailboxes. It was a normal suburban evening in a normal suburban neighborhood, made possible by the simple principle that community governance should serve the community, not the egos of those in power. That principle had been tested in this neighborhood, and it had survived. Patricia Henderson was gone, but the lessons remained. The HOA board operated with transparency now. Homeowners felt empowered to ask questions and challenge decisions. Disputes were resolved through conversation and facts rather than autocratic decree. My garage stood as a permanent reminder that property rights matter and that abuse of authority can be defeated. Every time I walked into that building to work on a project, I remembered the fight it had taken to build it, and the changes that fight had created. The structure was made of wood and concrete and steel, but it represented something more enduring. The idea that, in America, even the smallest property owner has rights that must be respected, and that when those rights are threatened, it is worth fighting back. The wetlands that never existed had taught me more than any real environmental feature ever could. They had taught me about courage, community, and the importance of demanding truth in the face of convenient lies. They had taught me that expensive fights are sometimes necessary, that documentation is powerful, and that standing alone against institutional pressure is possible when you are armed with facts. Most importantly, the fake wetlands had taught me that change is possible. A broken system could be reformed. An abusive leader could be removed. A community could recover from years of dysfunction and become something better. None of it was easy and none of it happened quickly, but it was all possible when people cared enough to make it happen. I walked into my house, poured myself a drink, and sat by the window looking out at my garage in the fading light. Tomorrow, I would start working on a new project, maybe help another homeowner with their HOA dispute, or just enjoy a quiet day in the space I had fought so hard to create. The possibilities were endless now that the battle was over and the garage was mine. Patricia Henderson had tried to block my garage to protect her view and assert her control. Instead, she had sparked a revolution in neighborhood governance that stripped away her power and created lasting reforms. The garage stood not just as my personal victory, but as a monument to what happens when ordinary people refuse to be bullied and demand accountability from those in authority. In the end, the wetlands designation had been Patricia's biggest mistake. By reaching so far beyond reason, by making claims so obviously false, she had given me no choice but to fight back with overwhelming evidence. A more subtle approach might have worked. A smaller obstacle might have made me give up. But declaring wetlands where none existed, blocking an approved project with transparently false environmental claims that had been a bridge too far. The soil report had been worth every penny. Those 43 pages of technical analysis had exposed the truth and demolished Patricia's credibility. Science had triumphed over manipulation. Facts had defeated feelings. And a neighborhood had learned that their HOA served them, not the other way around. As darkness settled over Meadowbrook Hills and stars began appearing in the Colorado sky, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My garage was built. My car was restored. My community was healthy. And somewhere out there, other homeowners facing their own battles with unreasonable HOAs might read my story and find the courage to stand up for their rights. That was worth all the stress, all the money, and all the time I had invested in fighting Patricia Henderson and her fake wetlands. Property rights matter. Truth matters. Accountability matters. And sometimes, one person willing to stand up and fight can change everything. The garage doors were closed, the Mustang was safe inside, and tomorrow would bring new projects and new possibilities. But tonight, I simply enjoyed the victory of having built exactly what I wanted on my own property, despite every obstacle Patricia Henderson had tried to place in my way. The fake wetlands were gone, replaced by concrete and lumber and the satisfaction of a battle well fought and decisively won.